This September it will be 35 years since I entered the seminary. And there's a song that goes all it means is I'm old. There's a song that goes, was yesterday really that long ago? And the answer is yes, it really was that long ago. But one of the focus of complaints for seminarians, at least when I was there, was the food. And the challenge when you live in an institution. My mother used to say to people when I was in the seminary, they say, "How's your son?" "Oh, he's away in an institution." And they all thought I was in the state hospital. But there's a regular 30-day schedule that they repeat, and some meals are good, some meals aren't. So I learned to be really, really good friends with Tony the Tiger. Frosted Flakes served me well. The Israelites no sooner get out of Egypt and they start complaining about the food. It seems to be just a perennial complaint of human beings, particularly when we don't have control over the type of food or how the food is prepared. So we complain. But usually that complaint is a distraction from other things. It's a distraction from the real issue, which is our sometimes almost fundamental discontentment, our irritability that things aren't the way we want them to be. And mostly our fears that surface that we don't have control over certain things. So we kind of focus on an external thing like the food that we think we can control to try to at least make sense of our world. And the problem, of course, is when we do that, it distracts our attention from the real issue, from where we really need to look. And for the Israelites, the Hebrew people at this point, they're called, the real issue was that they were free. They were free from Egypt. They had crossed the Red Sea. Moses led them. It was a whole different way of existing, something that they had prayed for a long time, and now it was here. They were embracing their freedom. But as so often is the case, we can often trade our freedom for our security. The Israelites say, "Oh, that we were back in Egypt with our flesh pots and our bellies full." It sounds like just what an addict would say. Just one more and I'll be okay. But freedom can be a scary thing. You have no one to tell you what to do, how to live, what decisions or choices to make. It's up to you. So you're forced to deal with yourself. And that's really the very heart of the spiritual journey, looking inward at yourself and all the things that motivate you, all the fears that consume you, the need for security, the biases that you have. And so in this situation where the Israelites are complaining, their fears are erupting, their insecurity is quite obvious, God gives them manna. And the Hebrew word for manna, as it says in the reading, when the Hebrews saw it, they didn't know what it was. So they called it, what do you call it? Why do you call it? Because it didn't compare to anything they had ever seen. God doesn't so much at this point stop them from whining, but he nourishes them. He nourishes them for the journey that they need to go on. And they're about to find out very quickly who they really are. They're about to come to know vis-a-vis God who they are as human beings, what is the essence of being human. So we should pause at this time to ask ourselves, what about the manna? It's a pretty significant detail for us as we read this 6th chapter of John's Gospel, particularly for Catholics, because this gives us the heart of our teaching on the Eucharist, which separates us from many other Christian denominations. So Jesus says, "Just as the Father fed your ancestors in the desert with the heavenly bread, I will now feed you with the new heavenly bread. In fact, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never hunger." Jesus makes this parallel between the manna and the bread that he will give. Now, most first century Jews who would have been listening to Jesus would have had the expectation that the Messiah one day would come. And the Messiah would inaugurate a new Exodus, just like the old one. Moses had come to deliver the people from slavery in Egypt. The Messiah would come to release the people from sin and from death. And the first Exodus was a prefiguring of that release, that ultimate release from the real bondage, which is the bondage of self caused by sin and death. So the Israelites were learning only become free when they realize their identity in God. It was then and only then that they could enter the promised land. Remember, they have to wander for 40 years until they get it right. Once they realize who they are, they cross over into the land. Likewise, Jesus is saying to us, if you want true freedom from that spiritual hunger and thirst, that deep inner longing, then you'll find it in identification with me. Just as the Israelites found it in their identification with the law and the covenant, you'll find it now in me. Therefore, just as the Israelites ate manna in the desert, if you feed on the bread that Jesus gives, you'll find strength for the long journey. And that journey will ultimately take you to the promised land that Jesus called the kingdom. So the people who were listening to that Jesus that day, when he gives this teaching, they were expecting a new Messiah to come, and the new Messiah would be just like Moses. And just like Moses, he would bring with him the manna, once again, the real bread from heaven. And the people listening would have made the link between the manna and the bread that Jesus was talking about. So here's where they begin to really get filled with hope. Their ancestors hoped for the fulfillment of the promises. And so when Jesus puts this to them, that he is in fact the fulfillment of those promises, the question becomes, what will they do? Will they accept this new manna, just as the Israelites of old accepted the manna in the desert? Now, for that, we'll have to skip ahead to a few verses to see what their ultimate reaction to Jesus is, and we'll hear that in a few weeks. So we hear some of them were taken back by it, many of them walked away, and many of them, like their ancestors of old, just simply couldn't handle the truth. And so their journey was quite long. And I think, we shouldn't be too harsh on the Israelites or the people who walked away from Jesus that day when he gives this discourse, because we have those same fears. We're afraid to take that leap to move forward. We're used to our old selves. We might even sometimes like being our old selves. It's just comfortable. But we can get stuck. We can refuse to take that step, which is really the step of embracing faith. Well, what Jesus is saying is, eat this bread, the bread that I will give you, and you'll have enough courage and strength to take the next step on the journey. Otherwise, you'll get lost in the desert of your own life, and you won't find your way to the promised land. And Jesus is very absolute here. He says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can have no life in you. So think of yourselves as one of the Israelites that day at the foot of Mount Sinai, complaining about the food, complaining about your life or your family, your marriage, your finances, your family, your future. Like the Israelites of old, are you willing that moment to put all of that in God's hands, to trust your future to God, and to move forward? The Israelites didn't have a map. They didn't know where they were going. They were just told to go, and they went. Most of us don't have a good roadmap either about our lives. We may have some plans that we make, but they easily change. But if we trust God is in control, we can take that picture. Now, picture yourself hearing Jesus say, I will give you the true bread from heaven, there that day at the mountainside. Will you believe him? And if you do believe him, then will you follow? Will you allow him to feed you the bread for today that will be your strength to get you to tomorrow. And one final point is worth mentioning. In this chapter, John chapter 6, it really is a question of not seeing the forest through the trees. The people, as Jesus points out, came to him because they had their fill of the bread, the loaves that he had multiplied for the 5,000. So they were looking on a very superficial level. What they weren't seeing was who he was. Moses gave the people bread from heaven. Jesus gives the people bread miraculously as well. Can they not put it together? Can they not see who Jesus, hey, welcome. All right. Yeah. See, that's why Dad is thin. That's why Dad is thin. It's great. Last night, I was at a banquet, totally separate thing. It was all adults. They asked me to do the invocation, and I got up. As soon as I got to the microphone, a baby started just screaming. I'm thinking, what is it about me that I draw babies, you know? And the baby was like 3 blocks away. That was the thing. Anyway, sitting on that mountainside that day, the people had to make a choice. Was Jesus who he says he is, or is he something else? Was it just about the miraculous feeding of the 5,000 that they came back for more? Or was there something more to it? Jesus brings their attention at that moment back, and he point blankly asks them this question. If you believe I am the Messiah, then why ask me for more signs? Wasn't feeding 5,000 people enough to convince you? And if you don't believe that sign, there's no other signs that I can do that will get you to believe. And so he offers them this life-giving bread, this chance to find their way, as their ancestors of old had found their way to the promised land, to eat this bread and drink this cup, that we may find our way eventually to the promised land of the kingdom of Jesus.
Like what you just heard? Visit Our Lady of Mount Carmel's social media pages for more faith-filled content. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Read the OLMC Tempe blog. Your Catholic community is online. Let's stay connected.